She stood at the church entrance in her wedding dress while her own father spat at her feet. Her mother turned away, unable to look at her daughter. Her siblings laughed, mocking her choice. The entire town had gathered, not to celebrate, but to shame her, all because she chose to love Marcus Thompson, a black soldier who had just been deployed overseas. They called her a disgrace. They said she had destroyed the family name. They promised she would regret this moment for the rest of her life. What they didn't know was that 12 years later, that same soldier would become the only thing standing between their survival and complete destruction. Before we continue with what happened next, let us know in the comments where you're watching this from. Are you in the USA? Which state? United Kingdom? Canada? Australia? Drop your city below. This story took place in a small town in Georgia, but its message reaches every corner of the world. Now, let's get back to how everything unfolded. Her name was Catherine Miller, and she grew up in Whitfield County, Georgia, in a town where everyone knew everyone's business. She came from what people call good stock. Her father owned the largest textile mill in 3 counties. Her mother served on every church committee, and her grandfather had been mayor for 2 decades. The Millers weren't just wealthy. They were legacy. They were untouchable. At least, that's what they believed. Catherine was expected to marry Jonathan Pierce, the son of another prominent family. Their union had been discussed since both were teenagers. Jonathan was handsome, came from money, and checked every box her parents had drawn up for her future. There was just one problem. Catherine couldn't stand him. He was arrogant, dismissive, and treated everyone beneath his social class like they were invisible. But her feelings didn't matter. The arrangement had been made. Everything changed in the summer of 2003 when Catherine volunteered at the Veterans Hospital during her college break. She was studying nursing, and her professor had arranged for students to gain practical experience by helping wounded soldiers who had returned from overseas. That's where she met Marcus Thompson. Marcus had been injured during his deployment in Iraq. Shrapnel had torn through his left leg, and he was recovering from his 3rd surgery. He was quiet, respectful, and despite his pain, he smiled at the nurses and thanked them for every small kindness. Catherine was assigned to his recovery wing, and over the weeks, they began to talk. He told her about growing up in Atlanta, about his mother who worked 3 jobs to keep him and his sisters fed, about joining the military because it was his only path to college. She told him about the suffocating expectations of her family, about feeling like she was living someone else's life, about wanting to matter for something more than her last name. They talked about books, about dreams, about the kind of people they wanted to become. She started visiting him on her days off. They laughed together. He challenged her thinking. She saw him as someone real, someone who had fought for his country, someone who treated her like a person instead of a trophy. And somewhere in those hospital corridors, surrounded by the smell of antiseptic and the quiet beeping of monitors, she fell in love with him. When Marcus was clear to leave the hospital, Catherine thought she would never see him again, but he asked for a phone number. She gave it to him. They started meeting for coffee, then dinners, then long drives where they would talk until sunrise. For the first time in her life, Catherine felt free. Her parents noticed a change immediately. She smiled more. She pushed back on their plans for her. When they pressed her about setting a wedding date with Jonathan, she finally told them the truth. She was seeing someone else. Someone she actually loved. Her father demanded to know who. She told him. The room went silent. Then her father's face turned red, and he exploded. He called Marcus every slur he could think of. Her mother cried, saying Catherine was throwing away everything they had built. Her younger brother laughed and said she must be joking. Her sister called her disgusting. They forbade her from seeing Marcus again. She refused. They threatened to cut her off financially. She didn't care. They told her she would be disowned. She said that was their choice, not hers. The fights escalated for months. Her father showed up at Marcus's apartment and threatened him. Her mother staged an intervention with the pastor. Her siblings spread rumors about her around town. But Catherine and Marcus held on to each other. And when Marcus was redeployed for another tour, he asked her to marry him before he left. She said yes without hesitation. They planned a small ceremony at the courthouse, but word got out. Her family found out the date. And on that morning, When Catherine arrived in her simple white dress, her entire family was waiting outside, not to support her, to stop her. Her father stood in front of the courthouse doors, blocking her path. He told her if she walked through those doors, she would never be his daughter again. Her mother sobbed, begging her to reconsider, saying she was ruining her life. Her brother mocked her, saying she was a race traitor. Her sister recorded everything on her phone, laughing as she uploaded it to social media. A crowd had gathered. Neighbors, family friends, people from church. They weren't there to celebrate. They were there to witness her humiliation. Someone threw a drink at her. Someone else shouted that she was a disgrace to white people. An elderly woman from her mother's book club shook her head and said, "Your grandmother is rolling in her grave." Catherine stood there, tears streaming down her face, and looked at Marcus. He stood beside her in his military dress uniform, his jaw clenched, his hands shaking. He whispered, "We don't have to do this. We can leave. We can go anywhere else." But Catherine took his hand, looked her father directly in the eyes, and said, "You're right. After today, I'm not your daughter anymore, because I would rather be his wife than your trophy." She walked past her father, past her mother, past the crowd, and she married Marcus Thompson that afternoon. Her family didn't attend, not a single member. When she walked out of that courthouse as Mrs. Thompson, her phone was flooded with messages. Her father had officially disowned her. Her mother blocked her number. Her siblings posted cruel messages online. The family lawyer contacted her to inform her she had been removed from all wills and trusts. She had lost everything except Marcus. And for years, that was enough. Marcus served 2 more tours overseas. Catherine worked as a nurse to support them. They rented a small apartment in Atlanta. They lived paycheck to paycheck. They talked about having children someday, about buying a house, about building the life they had dreamed of. But then Marcus's unit was ambushed during his final deployment. He was severely injured. His leg, which had never fully healed from the first injury, was damaged beyond repair. He came home with a medical discharge, chronic pain, and deep psychological scars. He struggled with PTSD. He couldn't work. Their savings disappeared into medical bills. Catherine picked up extra shifts, working herself to exhaustion, but it wasn't enough. They were drowning. Meanwhile, back in Whitfield County, the Miller family was thriving. Her father had expanded his business. Her siblings had married into other wealthy families. They posted photos of their lavish vacations, their new cars, their perfect lives. Catherine saw these posts and felt nothing. She had made her choice, and she would make it again. But then everything collapsed for the Millers. It started with a lawsuit. Several former employees of the Miller textile mill came forward with accusations of labor violations, unsafe working conditions, and withheld wages. The case gained media attention. Reporters dug deeper. They found financial irregularities, tax evasion, fraud. The mill that had been the foundation of the Miller family's wealth for 3 generations was built on lies. Catherine's father was indicted on multiple charges. His assets were frozen. The family's bank accounts were seized. The cars were repossessed. The mansion they had lived in for decades was foreclosed on. Everything they had mocked Catherine for giving up was taken from them in a matter of months. Her mother had a nervous breakdown and was hospitalized. Her brother's wife left him when the money disappeared, taking their children. Her sister lost her job because no one wanted to be associated with the Miller name anymore. They went from the most powerful family in the county to pariahs overnight. Catherine heard about all of this from a former neighbor who reached out to her on social media. The message said, "I thought you should know what's happening to your family. They've lost everything. Your father is facing 20 years in prison. Your mother is in a psychiatric facility. Your siblings are broke and homeless. I know they treated you terribly, but they're in serious trouble." Catherine read the message 3 times. She showed it to Marcus. He looked at her and said, "What do you want to do?" She didn't know. For 12 years, these people had treated her like she didn't exist. They had humiliated her. They had abandoned her. They had chosen their pride and their prejudice over their own daughter and sister. Why should she care what happened to them now? But then she thought about her mother. Whatever her faults, she had brought Catherine into this world. She thought about her siblings. They had been brainwashed by their father's hatred, but they were still her blood. She thought about the version of herself who had walked away from that courthouse 12 years ago, and she knew that woman wouldn't turn her back on people who were suffering, even if those people had turned their backs on her. She told Marcus she wanted to help. He stared at her in disbelief. He reminded her of everything they had done, the names they had called him, the way they had treated her, the years of silence and rejection. He asked her why she would lift a finger to help people who had made it clear she was dead to them. Catherine's answer was simple. Because I'm not them. I won't become cruel just because they were cruel to me. If I walk away now, then they win. They turn me into someone bitter and vengeful. I refuse to give them that power. Marcus was silent for a long time. Then he nodded. If you're going to help them, then I'm going with you. We do this together. They drove to Whitfield County for the first time in over a decade. The town looked different. The mill had closed. Many businesses had shut down. The prosperity that had defined this place was gone. They went to the hospital first to see Catherine's mother. The woman lying in that hospital bed looked nothing like the proud, polished matriarch Catherine remembered. Her mother had aged 20 years. Her hair was gray and thin. Her hands shook. When she saw Catherine walk into the room, she broke down sobbing. She grabbed Catherine's hand and said, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for everything. You were right. About everything. We were so wrong. Catherine cried too. She held her mother's hand and said, I forgive you. I forgave you a long time ago. Her mother looked at Marcus, standing quietly near the door, and said, I don't deserve your forgiveness. Either of you. The things we said, the things we did. I was a coward. I let your father's hatred guide me, and I destroyed my own family. Marcus stepped forward. Mrs. Miller, what's done is done. We're here now. Tell us what you need. Over the next several hours, Catherine and Marcus learned the full extent of the disaster. Her father was in jail awaiting trial. The legal fees had consumed everything. Her siblings were living in a motel, unable to find work because of the family scandal. There was no money for food, for medicine, for anything. The family that had once ruled this town had been reduced to absolute poverty. Catherine wanted to help, but she and Marcus barely had enough of themselves. His medical expenses were ongoing. They had debt. They lived modestly. They couldn't afford to financially support 3 adults and pay for a legal defense. But Marcus had an idea. He had connections from his military service. Brothers in arms who had gone into different fields. One had become a lawyer who specialized in workers' rights and labor law. Another worked in accounting and forensic finance. Marcus reached out to them, explained the situation, and asked for help. These men owed Marcus their lives from things that had happened overseas. They agreed immediately. The lawyer took on Catherine's father's case pro bono. He dug into the evidence and found that while her father had made mistakes, many of the worst accusations had been fabricated by a business rival who wanted to take over the mill. The accountant helped reconstruct the financial records and proved that most of the alleged fraud was actually mismanagement, not criminal intent. It took 8 months, but the charges were reduced. Catherine's father pleaded guilty to minor violations, paid significant fines, and was sentenced to community service instead of prison time. It wasn't a complete vindication, but it saved him from dying behind bars. During those 8 months, Marcus did something nobody expected. He hired Catherine's brother to work with him. Marcus had started a small security consulting business, using his military experience to help local businesses assess vulnerabilities. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid. He taught Catherine's brother everything he knew. He treated him with respect. He gave him a second chance. Catherine helped her sister find a job at the hospital where she worked. She used her reputation and her connections to vouch for her. She mentored her sister, teaching her how to work hard, how to be humble, how to rebuild from nothing. Slowly, piece by piece, the Miller family began to stabilize. They would never have their mansion back. They would never have their status back. But they had something more important. They had their lives. And they had it because of the man they had once mocked and rejected. The moment that changed everything came on a cold evening in November. Catherine's father had been released from his community service obligations and was staying in a small rental house that Catherine and Marcus had helped him secure. He had asked to meet with Marcus privately. Catherine was nervous, but Marcus agreed. The two men sat across from each other in that tiny living room. Catherine's father looked at the floor for a long time before speaking. When he finally did, his voice was barely a whisper. "I owe you an apology. But I know an apology is enough. There aren't words for what I did to you, what I did to my daughter, what I did to my family. I let hate guide me. I let pride destroy everything that mattered. And you, the man I called every evil name I could think of, you saved us. You saved me. You had every right to let us rot. But you didn't. Why?" Marcus looked at him and said, "Because your daughter loves you, and I love her, and she asked me to help. That's the only reason I needed. But I want you to understand something, Mr. Miller. I didn't do this to prove anything to you. I didn't do this so you would accept me. I did this because it was the right thing to do. That's all." Catherine's father nodded, tears streaming down his face. "You're a better man than I ever was. You have more honor in your little finger than I have in my entire body. I spent my whole life thinking I was superior because of the color of my skin, because of my money, because of my name. And it took losing everything to realize I was just a small, hateful fool. My daughter saw what I couldn't see. She saw a real man, a good man, and I tried to destroy her for it." He stood up, walked over to Marcus, and extended his hand. "I know I don't deserve your respect, but I'm asking for it anyway. Thank you for saving my family. Thank you for being the man I should have been." Marcus shook his hand. "I didn't save your family, sir. Your daughter did. She's the one who refused to give up on you. She's the one who saw past what you did and chose love over bitterness. If you want to thank someone, thank her." Catherine's father turned to his daughter, who had been standing in the doorway, watching. He walked to her and collapsed in her arms, sobbing, "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I'm so sorry for everything. You were braver than all of us. You were right about everything. Can you ever forgive me?" Catherine held her father and whispered, "I already have, Dad. I already have." The years that followed brought complete transformation. Catherine's father became an advocate for racial justice and reconciliation. He spoke at churches and community centers about his past hatred and how it had destroyed his family. He worked alongside Marcus, helping other families bridge racial divides. Her mother joined her, and together they created programs to support interracial couples who faced discrimination. Catherine's siblings rebuilt their lives with humility and gratitude. Her brother became Marcus's business partner, and together they expanded the security firm into one of the most respected in the state. Her sister became a nurse's advocate, fighting for fair wages and better working conditions, inspired by the workers her family had once exploited. The town that had once gathered to mock Catherine and Marcus eventually invited them to speak at the annual community celebration. They stood on that stage, holding hands, and told their story. They talked about love overcoming hate, about forgiveness breaking chains, about how the people who laugh at you today might need you tomorrow. And when they finished, the entire town stood and applauded. But the most powerful moment came 5 years after Catherine's father's release, at a small ceremony in the rebuilt Miller family church. Catherine and Marcus had finally been able to afford the wedding they had always dreamed of. And this time, every member of her family was there, not to mock, not to shame, but to celebrate. When the pastor asked who gave this woman to be married, Catherine's father stood up. He looked at Marcus and said, "I do, and I am honored to give my daughter to a man who is everything I failed to be. A man of courage, integrity, and unconditional love. A man who taught me what it really means to be strong. Son, I don't just give you my daughter. I give you my respect, my gratitude, and my love." There wasn't a dry eye in that church. Catherine and Marcus renewed their vows that day, surrounded by a family that had been broken and rebuilt, by a community that had learned from its mistakes, and by a love that had survived everything the world had thrown at it. The story doesn't end there, though, because years later, when Catherine and Marcus's children asked them about how they met, about why some of their relatives were white, and they had faced so much opposition, Catherine told him something profound. She said, "There will always be people who laugh at you for loving who you love, for being who you are, for choosing what's right over what's easy. Let them laugh, because one day, those same people might need you. And when that day comes, you get to choose who you want to be. You can be bitter, or you can be better. Your father and I chose better. And that choice saved everyone." Marcus added, "The uniform I wore never made me a hero. Fighting overseas didn't make me a hero. What made me a hero was loving your mother when the world said I shouldn't. What made me a hero was showing mercy when I had every right to walk away. Real strength isn't about fighting enemies. It's about saving the people who were once your enemies. That's what it means to be a protector." The Miller family learned that lesson the hard way. They learned that money, status, and pride are worthless when you've lost your humanity. They learned that the person you reject today might be the only one who shows up to save you tomorrow. And they learned that love, real love, is the most powerful force in the world. It can survive mockery. It can survive abandonment. It can survive hate. And when everything else crumbles, love is the only thing strong enough to rebuild what was broken. So to everyone watching this, remember Catherine and Marcus. Remember that the person you laugh at today might be the person who saves you tomorrow. Remember that love doesn't see color, status, or prejudice. Love sees the heart. And when you choose love over hate, when you choose forgiveness over bitterness, when you choose to be a protector instead of a destroyer, you become the kind of person the world desperately needs. Drop a comment below if this story touched your heart. Share it with someone who needs to hear this message. And remember, the family that laughed at her for loving a black soldier learned the hardest lesson of all. The man they rejected became the only thing standing between them and complete destruction. And he saved them anyway. Because that's what real heroes do. That's what real love does. That's what changes the world.